Pretend to be my wife. 4 words. Spoken low, urgent, almost against her ear, and Raina Hale felt every single one land like a brand against her skin. She didn't know this man. She had walked through the wrong door. She was holding a borrowed clutch purse and wearing shoes that pinched her toes, and she absolutely positively did not belong in this room. And yet Cole Blackridge, the most powerful man in 3 counties, had just chosen her. If you're new here, subscribe. Hit the bell and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go. The evening had started with a wrong turn. That was the honest truth of it, and Raina Hale had a long, exhausting history with wrong turns. Wrong turns were practically her middle name. She'd been born into a family that had been making wrong turns for 3 generations. Her grandfather losing the family hardware store on a bad loan. Her father breaking his back at 42, trying to fix someone else's fence. Her mother sewing curtains and hemming wedding dresses until her fingers bled just to keep the lights on in their little house on the edge of Millbrook County. Wrong turns were the Hale family inheritance. But this particular wrong turn on this particular Tuesday evening in late October was going to change Raina's life in ways she could not yet begin to measure. She had been delivering a gown. That was all. A simple delivery. Mrs. Patrice Alderman had commissioned a repair job on her emerald silk dress, a beaded bodice that had split at the seam, and Mrs. Alderman had called at 4 in the afternoon, in a voice pitched somewhere between desperation and aristocratic command, insisting the dress be delivered to Blackridge Ranch no later than 7 p.m., because she was attending a celebration there tonight, and she absolutely had to wear that gown. Raina had worked 6 straight hours on that seam. She had pricked her fingers twice. She had eaten half a granola bar for dinner, and she had driven 40 minutes in her rattling 2009 Honda Civic following GPS directions that had apparently never met a rural Texas back road in their algorithmic life. She parked where the driveway told her to park. She followed the lights. She pushed open the first large door she found because the October wind was biting cold and the dress box was heavy and awkward in her arms. She stepped inside. And she walked directly into another world. The room was enormous, not large enormous. Vaulted ceilings with exposed dark wood beams, chandeliers that weren't electric, so much as architectural cascading warm gold light across 100 people in formal wear. Silk. Diamonds. The quiet, careful laughter of people who had never worried about a utility bill in their lives. Raina stood just inside the door holding a garment box, wearing her good black slacks, and the cream blouse she'd ironed that morning, her dark hair pulled back in a simple knot, her feet in low heels that had seemed perfectly appropriate 3 hours ago and now felt almost comically modest against a sea of designer shoes. For exactly 3 seconds, no one noticed her. Then someone did. She felt the shift before she saw it, a subtle turning of heads the way a room calibrates to an unfamiliar presence. A woman near the fireplace glanced at her, and then looked away with the particular speed of someone deciding something. A man in a gray suit let his eyes travel from Raina's face to her clothes and back again in a single comprehensive assessment. Raina gripped the garment box tighter. Wrong door, she thought. I came in the wrong door. She began to turn. There you are. The voice came from her left. Deep, even. Carrying a quiet authority that parted the ambient noise of the room the way a knife parts water. She turned, and Cole Blackridge was walking toward her. She knew who he was, the same way you know a storm is coming. Not because anyone tells you, but because everything in the atmosphere shifts. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark suit that somehow still managed to look like it belonged on a man who spent his days outdoors. His jaw was sharp. His eyes were a dark hazel, almost brown in this light, and they were fixed entirely on her with an expression she could not read at all. He reached her in 4 strides. He was closer than a stranger had any right to be, and his voice dropped low enough that only she could hear it beneath the music and the murmur of the room. "Play along," he said. "Please, I will explain everything, but right now I need you to play along." Raina stared at him. "I'm just delivering a—" "Your name is Raina," he said, and the fact that he knew her name stopped every word in her throat. I saw it on the order tag when you came in. My name is Cole, and in approximately 30 seconds, my Aunt Marjorie is going to reach us, and I need her to believe that you are my wife." The word landed like a stone in still water. Wife. "I'm sorry," Raina said very carefully, "but I think you have the absolute wrong. $50,000. Her mouth closed. Cole Blackridge's expression didn't flicker. "To your family, directly, within the week. If you do this tonight, and let me explain properly tomorrow." Raina thought about the disconnect notice sitting on her mother's kitchen counter. She thought about her father's medical bills. She thought about the 3 maxed credit cards, and the way her mother cried quietly at the kitchen table when she thought no one could hear. She thought about all of that in approximately 4 seconds. "How long?" she said. Something shifted in Cole's eyes. Relief, maybe, or something close to it. "Tonight. Just tonight. I will explain." "Aunt Marjorie is already looking at us," Raina said quietly. Cole didn't look. "I know. And she's walking this way." "I know." "Then you should probably take the garment box," Raina said, "because no man's wife walks into her own party carrying a dress delivery." For the first time, something that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood of one, crossed Cole Blackridge's face. He took the box from her arms without hesitation, handed it smoothly to a passing staff member with a murmured instruction, and then with the calm confidence of a man who had been making high-stakes decisions his entire life, he placed his hand at the small of her back. Raina felt it like a current. "Smile," he said quietly. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad." "Right now," she said through a fixed smile, "I'm not ruling it out." Marjorie Blackridge was 63 years old, impeccably dressed, and possessed of the kind of social radar that could detect inauthenticity from 40 yards. She reached them with both hands extended, her eyes moving between Cole and Raina, with an expression Raina couldn't quite categorize. Surprise, certainly, but underneath it, something sharper, something calculating. "Cole," she said, kissing his cheek. Then her eyes settled on Raina. "And you must be—" "Raina," Cole said. "My wife." The word came out of his mouth with absolute devastating calm. Marjorie's perfectly shaped eyebrow rose exactly 1 centimeter. "Your wife." "Yes." "Cole." Marjorie's voice remained pleasant. It was the pleasantness of a woman who had survived 60 years of social warfare and was not remotely threatened. "You have been telling this family for 3 years that you had no intention of marrying anyone." "People change their minds, Aunt Marjorie." "Indeed, they do." Marjorie turned to Raina with a smile that was warm on the surface and probing underneath. "How long have you two been married, dear?" Raina felt Cole's hand press barely at her back. "Long enough," Raina said, "that he still hasn't cleaned his side of the bathroom sink." Marjorie blinked. Then she laughed, a real laugh startled out of her, genuine and surprised. And Cole Blackridge, standing beside Raina Hale in the middle of his family's engagement celebration, exhaled very slowly and very quietly, and she felt it. The next hour was the most exhausting performance of Raina's 23 years. She had sewn wedding gowns. She had pinned hems on brides who wept from happiness and altered bridesmaid dresses for women who were visibly holding their emotions together with safety pins and willpower. She understood ceremony. She understood the weight of presentation, but she had never performed it for herself, and the stakes had never been this impossibly high. Cole was good. She would give him that. He was attentive without being theatrical. A hand briefly on her shoulder. Here, a glance in her direction. There, the natural territorial awareness of a man who was accustomed to protecting what was his. He introduced her to 3 different couples, whose names she immediately lost, guided her away from conversations that veered toward specific details, and twice refilled her champagne glass with the practiced ease of a man who had been attending these events his entire life. But Raina noticed things. She noticed that the woman Cole was supposed to be celebrating tonight, the fiancé of his younger brother Garrett, watched her from across the room with open, unconcealed curiosity. She noticed that a silver-haired man in the far corner of the room had been watching Cole for the better part of 40 minutes with an expression that was not friendly. She noticed that the staff moved differently around Cole, not with fear, but with respect, and that when he spoke to them, he actually looked at their faces. She noticed, too, that he was lying through his teeth right alongside her and not flinching even slightly. That either made him very brave or very dangerous, and she hadn't yet decided which. "Who is the man by the window?" she said quietly, during a brief moment when they were standing together without an audience. "The silver-haired one. He's been watching you." Cole didn't turn to look. He didn't need to. "Harrison Morrison." "Friend?" "No." "Enemy." Cole picked up his own champagne glass and looked out across the room. "Business adversary. He's been trying to acquire a water rights contract that my family holds. He's also been telling certain people in this county that I am, and I'm quoting, too young and too reckless to be trusted with the Black Ridge legacy." Raina glanced at Morrison. He was still watching. "And are you?" Cole looked at her. "Are you always this direct?" "I'm a seamstress," she said. "We work in straight lines." He studied her for a moment with those hazel eyes that gave away very little. "I'm not reckless," he said finally. "I'm adaptable." "Like tonight." "Like tonight." Morrison began to move across the room. Raina felt it before she saw it. That atmospheric shift again, the one that meant something was about to happen. She had lived her whole life reading Rooms her parents' kitchen, when the tension meant Bill's the sewing shop, when a client was about to be difficult, the neighborhood when something had gone wrong. She read Rooms the way other people read words. "He's coming over," she said. "I know." "Should I be doing something?" Cole glanced down at her, and something in his expression changed, not softening exactly, but adjusting. Recalibrating. "Just be yourself," he said. "You've been doing fine." "I've been improvising." "That's what being yourself looks like sometimes." Morrison arrived. He was shorter than he'd appeared from a distance, but the silver hair and the tailored suit gave him a presence that compensated. He shook Cole's hand with the grip of a man making a point. "Blackridge," he said. Then his eyes moved to Raina, and they were sharp and assessing. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "Harrison." Cole's voice was perfectly level. "This is my wife, Raina." Morrison's eyes didn't move from her face. "Wife." He said the word the way Marjorie had, with that same precise pause around it. "Congratulations are in order, then." His eyes flicked to Cole. "When did this happen?" "Some time ago," Cole said. "We're private people, obviously." Morrison smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Your family didn't mention a wife when we met last spring, Cole. In fact, your father specifically indicated that your personal situation was—" "My father," Cole said, "speaks about a great many things." Morrison's attention returned to Raina. "What did you say your family does?" "Mrs. Blackridge?" Raina held his gaze. Something in her, the part of her that had spent her whole life being underestimated, the part that had learned to measure twice and cut once, and never ever show a client that she was uncertain, that part settled like ballast in her chest. "My mother is a master seamstress," she said calmly. "My father ran his own business until an injury forced him to retire. My family works for what we have." She met Morrison's eyes without flinching. "I was raised to think that's something to be proud of." Morrison looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled this time. Something slightly more genuine reached the edges of it. Not warmth, but recognition maybe. "Well," he said, "you're certainly direct. I've been told." Morrison glanced at Cole one last time, then moved on. In the silence that followed, Cole was very still beside her. "Well," he said after a moment. "Well," she agreed. "You didn't have to do that." "I know. But you did." Raina set down her champagne glass. "Mr. Blackridge, I have been poor my entire life, and I have had people look at me the way that man just looked at me for as long as I can remember. I have learned that the only thing worse than being underestimated is letting someone see that it bothers you." She smoothed the front of her blouse. "I'm not particularly good at many things, but I am very good at not letting people see that it bothers me. Cole was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then, "You're better at this than I thought you'd be." "I'm better at most things than people think I'll be," she said. "That's another thing you learn when you're the girl who comes in the wrong door." At 10:45, the celebration began to wind down. The caterers moved with quiet efficiency. The chandeliers seemed to lower their brightness by some invisible agreement. Guests began to collect their things, offer final congratulations to Garrett and his fiancée, make their gracious exits. Raina was exhausted in a way that went past physical, the particular bone tiredness of sustained performance, of holding every word and expression at careful attention for hours. Cole appeared at her elbow. "I need to speak with you," he said quietly, "before you leave." They moved to a side room, a study lined with books and old photographs, and the quiet smell of wood polish and leather. And Cole closed the door behind them, and for the first time in nearly 3 hours, Raina felt the performance come off her like a coat. She sat down without being invited. Her feet hurt. Cole remained standing. He looked, she thought, as if he had also been carrying something heavy all evening and was deciding whether to set it down. "You were right," he said, "about the dress box. That was quick thinking." "Thank you." "I need to explain." "Yes," she agreed. "You really do." He moved to the window, not pacing exactly, but the way people move when they're organizing their thoughts into something they can actually say. "My father died 8 months ago," he said. "The ranch passed to me. But there are contracts, long-term water rights agreements, land leases that were written with specific succession clauses." Raina waited. Clauses that require the primary holder to be, he paused, married, settled. The language is old. It was written by men who believed that an unmarried man couldn't be trusted to make long-term decisions about property. His jaw tightened. "It's archaic. It's insulting. But it's legally binding, and the deadline for compliance is 30 days from now. And Morrison knows about the clause." Cole looked at her. "Morrison is the one who found it. He brought it to the county board last month. He's been waiting." Raina was quiet for a moment, doing the math. "And tonight was my brother's engagement party. Every major landowner in the county was here, Morrison included." Cole's voice was very even. "I needed the room to see that I had already that I wasn't." He stopped. "I didn't plan for you. I want to be clear about that. You walked in, and I made a decision in 3 seconds, and I am fully aware of how that sounds." "It sounds," Raina said carefully, "like a man who is used to making decisions for other people without their input." The words landed. She could see them land. "Yes," Cole said. "That's fair." She looked at him. He looked back. And in the quiet of that room, with the sound of departing guests muffled behind the closed door, Raina Hale felt something she hadn't expected. The sense that this man, powerful and presumptuous, and clearly accustomed to getting his way, was also underneath all of it genuinely worried. Not for himself. She thought it was for the ranch. For the people who worked there. For something that had been built across generations that might come apart because of a line of legal language written 100 years ago by someone who couldn't have imagined this moment. She didn't admire the presumption, but she understood the weight. "The 50,000, she said. "Is that real?" "It is. For tonight." He held her gaze. "I was hoping," he said quietly, "to discuss something longer term." Raina looked at this man, this stranger, who had taken her garment box and handed her a champagne glass, and said, "Wife," with such absolute conviction that half a room of aristocrats had believed him, and she thought about wrong turns. Sometimes she thought a wrong turn takes you somewhere you were always supposed to go. She wasn't sure she believed that yet, but she was listening. "Talk," she said. "I've got time." Outside, the chandeliers were going dark one by one. Harrison Morrison sat in his car at the end of the long driveway and made a phone call. And in the study at Black Ridge Ranch, a seamstress and a rancher began carefully to negotiate the shape of a lie that would become in ways neither of them could yet imagine the most honest thing either had ever lived. The offer was simple. The consequences were not. Cole laid it out the way Reyna imagined he laid out everything, directly, without ornament, with the particular efficiency of a man who had learned that sentiment was a luxury and time was not. 1 year. A legal marriage. She would live at Black Ridge Ranch, maintain appearances in public, attend necessary social functions, and present herself as his wife to every contractor, lawyer, county official, and nosy neighbor who required proof. In return, her family's debt, all of it, every disconnection notice and medical bill and overdue loan, would be cleared within 30 days of signing. A monthly stipend for personal expenses. And at the end of 12 months, a clean, uncontested divorce and a settlement that would let her open her own alteration shop free and clear. Reyna listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "You had this ready?" Cole paused. "I had something like it ready. You've been thinking about this for a while." "I've been thinking about the problem for a while," he said carefully. The solution walked in through the wrong door. She looked at him across the study, this man she had known for 4 hours, and she thought, he is not telling me everything. She could feel the shape of the omission, the way you feel a pulled thread in fabric, not always visible, but there underneath, waiting to unravel something. But she also thought about her mother, and the kitchen table, and the way $50,000 was not an abstraction when your family was drowning. "I need to think," she said. "Of course. And I need to talk to my family." Something moved across his face, not reluctance exactly, but caution. "The fewer people who know the arrangement isn't Mr. Blackridge." Her voice was quiet, but it had an edge. "I am not going to disappear for a year without telling my mother where I am. That is not negotiable." He held her gaze for a moment, then nodded once. "Fair." She stood, smoothed her blouse again, a habit she realized, something she did when she needed to feel composed. "I'll give you an answer by Friday." She was almost to the door when he said, "Reyna." She stopped, but didn't turn. "What you did out there tonight with Morrison." A pause. "That wasn't nothing. I want you to know that." She stood there for 1 breath. 2. Then she opened the door and walked back into the thinning light of the party, and she didn't let herself think about the way his voice had sounded when he said her name until she was alone in her car on the long, dark road back to Millbrook. She said yes on Thursday. She couldn't make herself wait until Friday. Her mother cried. Not from sadness, or not only from sadness, but from the particular emotional overwhelm of a woman who had been carrying too much for too long and had just been told without warning that some of the weight was about to be lifted. Her father sat at the kitchen table and was quiet for a very long time, and then he said, "Is he a decent man?" Rena thought about the way Cole had looked at his staff, the way he'd said fair when she'd pushed back, the way he'd stood beside her while Morrison tried to make her feel small and let her handle it herself without stepping in. "I think so," she said. "I think he's trying to be." Her father nodded. That was enough for him. The papers were signed 2 days later in Cole's lawyer's office. A compact man named Gerald Pruitt, who had apparently known the Blackridge family for 30 years, and who looked at Rena over his reading glasses with an expression that managed to be both professional and deeply curious. The marriage license was filed that same afternoon. It was legal. It was real. And it was the strangest thing Rena Hale had ever done, standing in a county courthouse in her good blouse and signing her name to a document that made her officially Mrs. Cole Blackridge. Cole stood beside her. He signed his name below hers. His handwriting was larger than she expected. Broad strokes, decisive, no hesitation. Outside the courthouse, standing on the steps in the thin November light, neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Cole said, "My truck is this way." And Rena Hale picked up the single bag she'd packed and followed her husband to his truck, and they drove the 40 minutes to Blackridge Ranch in a silence that was not entirely uncomfortable, which surprised her more than almost anything else that day. The ranch was different in daylight. She had seen it at night, Lit and curated for a celebration, everything arranged for maximum impression. In daylight, it was something else, sprawling and real, and working, the kind of place that had been built not for beauty, but for function, though beauty had settled into it anyway over decades, like a habit no one had planned. The main house was large without being showy. The outbuildings were practical. There were horses in a far paddock, and a dog she didn't recognize yet who came to investigate her with serious professional thoroughness. Cole introduced her to his housekeeper, a woman named Dolores, who had apparently worked at the ranch for 22 years and who looked at Raina with an expression of complete, serene neutrality that Raina understood immediately was not neutrality at all, but sophisticated assessment wearing its politest face. "Mrs. Blackridge," Dolores said. "Raina, please," she said. Dolores's expression shifted by approximately 2 degrees, not a smile, but an adjustment. "Welcome to the ranch, Raina." Cole showed her the bedroom that would be hers. It was across the hall from his. She noted that without comment. He noted that she noted it without comment. They were already, she thought, developing a language of productive silences. "There's a full staff meeting tomorrow morning," he said. "I'd like you to attend." "Why?" "Because they need to see you. And because—" He stopped. "Because it would help if you understood how this place runs, what we're dealing with. The water rights contract isn't the only pressure point. Morrison has allies on the county board. He's been laying groundwork for months." Raina looked at him. "You're not just asking me to be a prop." "No. You're asking me to actually learn the operation. I'm asking you," Cole said carefully, "to be a real partner in this, as much as you're willing to be." She thought about that. A prop could be maintained at a distance, handled carefully, put back in its box when the performance was over. A partner was something else entirely. A partner got involved. A partner had opinions. A partner asked questions and expected answers. A partner was a risk. "Okay," she said. "But I'm going to have opinions." The ghost of that almost smile again. "I'm starting to figure that out." The first week was a masterclass in controlled chaos. Raina attended the staff meeting and met 8 people whose names she memorized by the end of the day, because she had always been good at names. It was a seamstress skill, matching faces to measurements, keeping track of who was who. She learned the ranch's operational structure, its seasonal rhythms, its financial pressure points. She asked questions that surprised people, partly because they were intelligent questions, and partly because she asked them without apology. She also made mistakes. She called a contractor by the wrong name in front of Cole's ranch manager, a weathered man named Pete Dunbar, who had forgotten more about cattle operations than Raina would ever know. And she saw Pete's eyebrow go up a fraction. She nearly agreed to a supply meeting on a day Cole had a county board presentation and had to be quietly corrected by Cole afterward in the kitchen, his voice low and even, not unkind. "It's fine," he said. "You're learning. I should have checked the calendar first." "Yes, but it's recoverable." He poured himself coffee, and then after a beat, poured a second cup and set it in front of her without asking. "It's always recoverable until it isn't. That's the first thing you learn running anything." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "What's the second thing? Never let them see you recalibrate. Make your adjustments look intentional." Raina looked at her coffee. "Is that what tonight was?" "At the party, you looked intentional." "I was terrified," he said. She glanced up. He was looking out the kitchen window. His jaw set, his profile as composed as ever. He said it the way he said everything, level factual without drama. "You didn't look it," she said. "That's the second thing," he said. By the end of the second week, they had developed something that wasn't yet comfort, but was in the neighborhood of it, a working rhythm. She learned that he was up at 5 every morning. She heard his boots on the stairs before her alarm, and that he drank his coffee black and ate the same breakfast every day without apparent boredom. She learned that he read actual physical newspapers, which she found oddly charming. She learned that he was patient with his staff in a way that cost him something. You could see the effort, sometimes the deliberate steadying, and that they respected him for it in the deep, quiet way that people respect something they've seen tested. He learned things about her too, though she caught him at it less often. He learned that she worked at the kitchen table. When she had alterations to finish, she'd brought her sewing kit and a backlog of client work, and that she was meticulous in a way that looked effortless until you watched closely. He learned that she didn't complain about things she considered her own responsibility to handle. He learned that she had a sense of humor she kept mostly under wraps in public and let out in small, precise doses in private. They practiced. It felt ridiculous at first, sitting across from each other in the study, while Cole's lawyer ran them through potential questions from a county board hearing, playing the roles of spouses who had to convince strangers they were real. Cole reached for her hand once during a practice session, and she startled, which made him pull back, which made her feel inexplicably guilty. "Sorry," she said. "No." He stopped, tried again. "We should practice that more. Physical contact. It reads when it's not natural." She looked at his hand on the table. She looked at hers. She reached out and placed her hand over his. It was deliberate, chosen, rehearsed. And yet the warmth of it traveled up her arm in a way that rehearsal did not account for. Neither of them mentioned it. Cole continued the practice session. Raina kept her hand where it was until Gerald Pruitt moved on to the next question, and then she moved it back to her lap and told herself it was muscle memory, just mechanics, just the body doing what the mind trained it to do. She was a very good seamstress. She was not. It turned out as good a liar as she'd thought. 3 weeks in Morrison made his first formal move. Cole came back from a county board meeting with a tightness around his eyes that Raina had learned to read as controlled anger, the particular stillness of a man who had processed something difficult in the truck on the way home and arrived having already decided not to lose his composure about it. She was at the kitchen table with a hemline that needed shortening. She looked up. "What happened?" she said. He sat down across from her, loosened his collar, looked at the table for a moment. Morrison filed a formal challenge to the water rights succession. He's claiming the marriage is... A pause. He used the word expedient. Raina set down her scissors. "Meaning he thinks it's fake." "Meaning he thinks it's fake." The word sat between them. "He can't prove it," she said. "He doesn't have to prove it to damage us. He just has to make the county board uncertain enough to delay the contract renewal. And a delay..." Cole's jaw tightened. A delay of more than 60 days triggers a default clause. Morrison's consortium gets first right of purchase on the water rights. Raina was quiet for a moment, running the numbers in her head. She had gotten surprisingly good at that over 3 weeks, absorbing the ranch's financial architecture, the way she absorbed a client's measurements, holding the shape of it in her mind so she could see where the seams were stressed. "What does he need to prove it's legitimate?" she said. "Evidence of a real relationship. Shared history. People willing to testify not just to the marriage existing, but to knowing about it, seeing it." He looked at her. "Morrison has apparently been asking around Millbrook, your town, about your family, about whether anyone knew you were involved with someone before the party." The cold moved through her before she could stop it. "My town," she said. "I'm sorry. I should have anticipated. Cole." She said his name and he stopped. "Does he know about my family's finances?" The pause was answer enough. She absorbed it, sat with it, let it settle. "So he's going to argue that I married you for money." "He's going to try to make it look that way, yes. And the fact that I did marry you partly for money is not the whole story," Cole said, and something in his voice shifted just slightly into something less controlled. "You also married me because the arrangement was fair, because you evaluated it and decided it was worth doing. Those aren't the actions of someone being exploited. Those are the actions of someone making a decision." She looked at him across the kitchen table in the middle of his ordinary Tuesday evening and thought, he is defending me. Not strategically, not because it helped the case. He was defending her, the real her, the seamstress who'd walked in the wrong door. Something in her chest did something she couldn't immediately name. "What do we do?" she said. Cole looked at her steadily. We make it real, he said. We stop practicing and we start living it. We go to church. We go to the feed store. We have dinner with my brother and his fiancée. We let people see us the way people see a real couple, not performing, just existing. That's harder than performing, she said. I know. Performing has a script. Existing doesn't. I know, he said again, and then more quietly. I'm asking you to trust me. Raina looked at this man who had upended her entire life with 4 words in a crowded room, who paid her family's debts and poured her coffee without asking, and stood beside her while Morrison tried to diminish her and said fair when she pushed back. Okay, she said. He exhaled. But, she added, I want to understand the water rights document, all of it, the legal language. He blinked. Why? Because if someone is going to challenge our marriage in a county board hearing, I want to understand exactly what's at stake well enough to speak to it myself. She picked up her scissors and returned to the hemline. I'm not going to walk into another room unprepared. Cole was quiet for a long moment. Gerald can send you the contract tonight, he said. Good. She made a clean cut. And Cole? He looked at her. The next time Morrison moves, she said, I want to know about it before you process it in the truck on the way home. We're supposed to be partners. His jaw moved. Something crossed his face that she thought later might have been the beginning of something she wasn't ready to name yet. Noted, he said. Outside, the wind moved across the open land, and somewhere in the far paddock, a horse called out to the dark, and the kitchen light burned warm and steady, and 2 people who had started as strangers sat across from each other in the oldest kind of silence. The kind that comes after something true has been said, and both people know it, and neither one is ready yet to say what comes next. The county board hearing was set for a Thursday. Gerald Pruitt called on Monday to deliver the news with the particular tone of a man who was trying to sound calm about something that was not calm at all. Morrison had filed a formal request for a legitimacy review, not of the marriage license itself, which was airtight, but of the relationship preceding it. He was arguing that the marriage had been constructed after the fact to satisfy a contractual clause, and he had submitted 3 affidavits from people in Millbrook County who had stated under oath that they had never seen Raina Hale in the company of Cole Blackridge prior to the engagement party. Cole listened to Gerald on the phone without speaking. Raina sat across the kitchen table from him and watched his face and read every word of the conversation from the set of his jaw and the stillness of his eyes. When he hung up, she said, "How bad?" "Bad enough," he said. "The board has to respond to a formal filing. They'll hold a review session. We'll be asked questions. Separately." "Separately," she repeated. "Morrison specifically requested it. He wants to see if our answers match." Raina set her coffee down. "He's thorough. He's been planning this longer than I realized." Cole's jaw worked. "He knew about the succession clause before my father died. I think he may have been the one who flagged it to the county board in the first place years ago, setting a trap and waiting. And we walked into it." "I walked into it," he said. "You're collateral damage." The phrase landed oddly. She looked at him. He was looking at the table, and something in his posture was different from usual, the careful control still there, but underneath it, something that looked like it was costing him more than it normally did. She had learned in 5 weeks what Cole Blackridge looked like when he was managing something alone, when he was carrying it without distributing the weight. She had told him they were partners. Cole. She waited until he looked up. "We prepared for this. We know the contract. We know our story, not the fake version, the real version of the last 5 weeks, because that part is actually true." She held his gaze. "They can ask me anything about this ranch, and I can answer it. They can ask me about your breakfast and your reading habits, and the way you talk to Pete Dunbar differently than you talk to Gerald and I will get every answer right, because I've been paying attention." He looked at her for a long moment. "Why?" "Because that's what I do," she said simply. "I pay attention." Something shifted in him. Not dramatically, Cole didn't do dramatic shifts. But it was there a slight loosening, the way a knot gives just enough to tell you it's going to eventually release. "We have 3 days," he said. "Then we'd better use them." They spent Monday and Tuesday preparing with Gerald, running through questions the board was likely to ask, working through the timeline of their relationship that they needed to present, not fabricated, but framed. The truth of 5 weeks could look like a year if you arranged it honestly and let the weight of it speak. But it was the third day that broke the careful structure they'd built. Wednesday morning. Raina was at the kitchen table reviewing the water rights contract. She had read it 3 times now and had developed opinions about its language that Gerald had initially seemed surprised by and then increasingly respectful of when Cole's brother Garrett walked in without knocking. She knew Garrett the way she knew a weather pattern she hadn't personally experienced, through signs and other people's reactions. He was younger than Cole by 4 years, lighter in temperament, easier with smiles. He'd been cordial at the engagement party briefly before the performance of the evening had pulled Raina into other orbits. Since then, she'd seen him twice, both times in passing, and he'd been pleasant and somewhat careful in the way of someone who had questions he hadn't decided to ask yet. He was not careful this morning. He sat down across from her without preamble and said, "I need to know if my brother is in actual trouble." Raina set the contract down. "Good morning, Garrett." "Good morning. Is he?" She looked at him. He had the same jaw as Cole, the same directness in the eyes, but where Cole's directness was controlled and measured, Garrett's was unguarded. He wore his feelings closer to the surface. It made him easier to read, and she thought easier to trust. "Yes," she said. "Morrison has filed a legitimacy challenge. The hearing is Thursday." Garrett leaned back, rubbed a hand over his face. "He's been telling me it's handled, that everything is under control." "He's been managing it. He's been managing it alone," Garrett said. And there was an edge in his voice that wasn't anger so much as old frustration, the kind that's been accumulating for years. "He does that. He carries everything alone, and then when it gets to the point where he can't anymore, he's already—" He stopped, looked at her. "What about you? How are you doing with all of this?" The question caught her off guard. Nobody had asked her that in 5 weeks. Not Cole, who was managing. Not Gerald, who was strategizing. Not Dolores, who maintained her careful professional warmth without crossing into personal territory. She paused, felt the honest answer surface. "I'm more invested than I expected to be." Garrett was quiet for a moment. "In the ranch?" She looked at the contract in front of her. "In all of it." He studied her the way Cole sometimes studied her, that Blackridge ability to see past what you were saying and look at the shape of what you meant. "He's not going to tell you if he's scared," Garrett said. "Just so you know, he's never told anyone when he's scared. Not since our dad got sick. He just gets quieter. And you can feel it in the whole house, but he won't say it." "I know," Raina said. Garrett looked at her. "You've only known him 5 weeks." "I know," she said again. He was quiet. Then, "You're good for him. I don't know if that's something you need to hear, but you are." She didn't know what to do with that. She folded it away carefully, the way you fold something fragile that you're not sure yet where to put. Cole came back from checking the east pasture fencing that afternoon and found Raina standing in the hallway outside the study with the water rights contract in one hand and a legal pad in the other, and she said without preamble, "I found something." He stopped. "What kind of something?" "The default clause Morrison is counting on the 60-day trigger if the marriage is ruled invalid." She held up the legal pad. "There's an appeals window built into the original agreement. 14 days. If we can demonstrate good faith compliance, a marriage that was real at the time of execution, the board can grant a temporary stay while an appeals process runs." Cole looked at her. "Gerald reviewed this contract." "Gerald reviewed it for the succession issue," she said. "He wasn't looking for the appeals language because he was focused on the challenge. But it's there, paragraph 19, subsection C. The language is old, and it's buried under 3 other clauses, but it's there." Cole crossed to her and took the legal pad. He read, His eyes moved quickly. She watched his face. Paragraph 19, he said quietly. Subsection C, she confirmed. He looked up at her, and the expression on his face in that moment, not relief exactly, but something deeper, something that had to do with being surprised by a person in the best possible way. That expression did something to her that all the practiced hand-holding and rehearsed eye contact had not managed to do. "I'm calling Gerald," he said. "I already texted him the page number," she said. Cole looked at her for one more beat. "Raina." "Yeah. Thank you." She nodded, turned back toward the kitchen. Didn't let him see what his face had done to her. End. Thursday arrived the way important days always do, faster than expected and heavier than prepared for. The county board review session was held in a conference room that smelled like old carpet and institutional coffee. There were 5 board members, a court reporter, Gerald and Harrison Morrison, sitting across the table with his own lawyer, a younger man whose suit cost more than Raina's monthly rent had ever been. Cole and Raina were interviewed separately, as Morrison had requested. Raina went first. She sat across from 5 strangers and a court reporter and answered every question with the measured, careful precision of a woman who had been paying attention for 5 weeks to a life that was not originally hers and had learned it anyway. What did her husband eat for breakfast? What time did he leave the house? What was the name of the ranch's primary water contractor? What were her husband's concerns about the eastern pasture? What were the ranch's operational priorities for the upcoming quarter? She answered every question correctly. She answered every question about Cole Blackridge with the quiet confidence of someone who knew a person, not performed them, not studied them. The way you study for a test, but knew them the way you know someone you have eaten breakfast with, and argued with, and sat in silence with, and watched manage their fear without ever admitting they were afraid. When they asked her if she loved her husband, she paused. The pause lasted 3 seconds. Then she said, "I know who he is. I know what he's trying to protect and why. And I know that he is a better man than he lets people see." She met the board chair's eyes. Whether you call that love depends on how you define the word. The room was very quiet for a moment. Then the board chair made a note on her legal pad, and the interview moved on. Cole's interview lasted longer. She waited in the hallway with Gerald, who said nothing, which she appreciated. When Cole came out, he looked at her immediately. Just looked. She raised an eyebrow in question. He gave the smallest, most controlled nod. They went back in together for the joint session. Morrison's lawyer started with the affidavits the 3 Millbrook residents who'd stated they'd never seen Raina and Cole together before the party. Gerald responded with paragraph 19 subsection C and the argument for a good faith compliance stay. Morrison's lawyer argued that good faith required demonstrable history, not legal language. And then Morrison himself spoke. He was precise, he was prepared, and he said, looking directly at Raina with those sharp eyes that missed very little, "Mrs. Blackridge, if that is indeed how we should address you, can you tell this board one thing that your husband has never told another person? One thing that you know about Cole Blackridge that demonstrates genuine intimacy rather than strategic familiarity?" The room went very still. Gerald started to object. Cole said quietly, "Gerald?" Gerald stopped. Cole was looking at Raina. Raina looked at Morrison. Then she looked at the board. Then very slowly she looked at Cole, and Cole looked back at her, and in that look was everything 5 weeks of coffee and contract language, and practiced hand-holding and genuine unplanned moments that neither of them had scripted. The morning he'd come back from the pasture, and she'd handed him coffee without being asked, because she'd simply known. The night she'd found the paragraph and watched his face do the thing it only did when he was truly surprised. The kitchen table silences that had stopped feeling empty and started feeling like something else entirely. She said, "He's scared." The room was silent. "Right now in this room, he's scared," she said, and her voice was steady and quiet and completely certain. "He won't say it. He never says it. He gets quiet and the whole house changes, and you can feel it if you're paying attention. But he's been scared since his father died and left him responsible for everything, and he manages it alone because that's what he learned to do. And the only time he doesn't look scared," she paused. Her voice stayed even, "is when he thinks someone is actually in this with him." She stopped. Cole's expression had done something she had never seen it do before. The control was still there, but underneath it, just underneath, something had cracked open. Morrison looked at him. Something in Morrison's face had shifted too. Not defeat, but the particular recalibration of a man who had prepared for one opponent and found another. The board chair cleared her throat. "We'll take a recess." It was in the hallway during that recess that it happened. Morrison cornered them near the water fountain, his lawyer hovering, and dropped his voice to something that was not quite a threat, but was built from the same material. "Whatever she said in there," he said to Cole, "I want you to know that this isn't over. The appeals process will take months. I have the resources to make those months very difficult." Cole said nothing. His jaw was set. He was doing the thing he did, managing, containing, holding. And then Morrison looked at Raina. "And you," he said. "You're a clever girl. But clever and legitimate are two different things. When this arrangement runs its course, and it will run its course, Mr. Morrison," Raina's voice was so calm it surprised even her. "I grew up in a house where the heat got cut off twice, and my mother sewed other people's dresses for 20 years so we could eat. I have been underestimated by better people than you with more cause, and I am still here." She held his gaze. "I suggest you stop confusing my background with my ceiling." Morrison stared at her. Cole turned to look at her. She kept her eyes on Morrison until he looked away. And when he did, she felt Cole's hand close around hers, not the practiced, deliberate contact of their rehearsals, but something else, something fast and instinctive and completely unplanned. His fingers threading through hers and holding. She didn't pull away. She held back. The board reconvened and granted a 30-day review period, which was not a win, but was not a loss. It was breathing room, a stay of the kind that paragraph 19 had promised, and Gerald called it the best possible outcome for the day. They drove home in silence again, but it was a different silence than the one from the courthouse 5 weeks ago. Fuller, heavier in a way that wasn't unpleasant. Halfway home, Cole said, "What you said in there, about me being scared." She kept her eyes forward. "Was I wrong?" "No." A long pause. "No, you weren't wrong." "I wasn't trying to—" She stopped. "I wasn't trying to expose you. I was trying to tell them something real. That's what you can't fake. That's what Morrison couldn't have planned for." Cole was quiet for a mile, 2 miles. The dark road running straight through flatland, the ranch somewhere ahead in the black. "My father used to say," Cole said finally, "that the only thing more dangerous than someone who knows your weaknesses is someone who knows them and doesn't use them against you." She turned to look at his profile. And he glanced at her, back at the road. "And I'm starting to understand what he meant." Her heart did something. She told it to stop. It did not stop. They pulled up to this ranch. Cole cut the engine. Neither of them moved for a moment in the quiet dark of the cab, and she could feel the space between them, feel the exact dimensions of it, the way it had changed from the space between strangers to something she didn't have a clean word for. She reached for the door handle. "Raina." She stopped. "The thing you said. About the only time I don't look scared." His voice was careful, precise. But underneath the precision, something was trembling slightly, like a line pulled taut. "You meant it." It wasn't a question. He knew she'd meant it. He was asking her to say it anyway. She looked at the windshield for a moment. Then she turned and looked at him. This man who had handed her the most absurd and consequential 4 words of her life, and she said, "Yes, I meant it." And Cole Blackridge, who never let people see him recalibrate, who had carried everything alone since his father's last breath, who had built his entire management of the world on the principle of controlled composure, Cole leaned across the space between them and pressed his mouth to hers. It lasted 3 seconds. It felt like a door opening. When he pulled back, they were both very still. "That wasn't supposed to happen," he said. His voice was rough in a way she'd never heard it. "No," she agreed. "I don't want to make this—" "I know. We had an arrangement." "I know," she said again. He was looking at her with those hazel eyes that had given so little away for 5 weeks, and were now giving everything, all of it, every carefully managed thing let loose in one unguarded moment. "Cole," she said quietly. "Yeah." "Shut up." And she reached across the space and kissed him back, and this time it lasted longer than 3 seconds, and it was not a performance, and it was not strategic, and it was not anything either of them had planned for when Raina Hale walked through the wrong door on a cold October evening with a borrowed clutch purse and shoes that pinched and someone else's dress in a box. Outside, the wind moved across Black Ridge land. The stars were relentless and thick, and inside a truck cab in the dark, 2 people who had started as strangers discovered with some surprise and very little warning that the arrangement had already ended, and something else, something that didn't have a contract and couldn't be negotiated, had quietly taken its place. Neither of them talked about the kiss the next morning. That was the first thing Raina noticed when she came downstairs at 6:15 and found Cole already at the kitchen table with his newspaper and his black coffee, and his unreadable expression that he was going to let her set the pace. He looked up when she came in, held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds, and then looked back at his paper. No acknowledgement, no awkward stumbling. No performance of normalcy that would have made the abnormality of the previous night more obvious. She poured her coffee. She sat down across from him. She picked up the legal pad she'd left on the table. After 2 minutes of silence, Cole said without looking up, "Gerald called at 5:30. The board confirmed the 30-day review. We have until December 14th. "Okay," she said. "What's our strategy?" He looked up then, and she saw in his face that he understood exactly what she was doing, not avoiding what had happened, but putting it where it belonged for now, in the space they'd returned to, when the immediate ground wasn't on fire. "Pete wants to move the water rights documentation into a consolidated file for the board's review," Cole said. "I need someone to cross-reference it against the original contract language." "I'll do it," she said. "It's about 400 pages. I've read it 3 times already. 400 pages isn't going to surprise me." Cole looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. Then he turned his page. "Dolores is making breakfast at 7. "I know," Raina said. "I can smell it from upstairs." And that was that. The kiss stayed in the truck cab where they'd left it, held in suspension like something that needed the right temperature before it could become what it was going to become. And both of them, separately and together, went about the business of saving the ranch. The 30-day review period turned out to be 30 days of sustained grinding pressure from 3 different directions at once. Morrison's lawyer began submitting supplemental affidavits, more Millbrook residents, more statements about never having seen Cole and Raina together. Each filing landed in Gerald's inbox, and then in Cole's, and each one was another small cut in the surface of something that was trying to hold. Gerald responded methodically, building a counter-record from ranch staff testimony. Pete Dolores, the contractor, who'd been in the kitchen the morning Raina had handed Cole his coffee without being asked, and the contractor had seen it and registered it without knowing he was registering anything significant. Raina threw herself into the documentation work with the focus she usually reserved for the most complicated alterations, the ones where a single misplaced pin could ruin everything. 400 pages of water rights history, cross-referenced against the succession contract, annotated in her precise handwriting. Gerald read her annotations and told Cole in front of her that she had caught 3 interpretive inconsistencies his office had missed. Cole said nothing. But that evening he put a cup of coffee in front of her at the table, without being asked, and she understood that for him, that was a complete sentence. The pressure from inside the family came from a different direction. Aunt Marjorie called on a Tuesday, and Cole took the call in the study with the door closed, and Raina, who was not eavesdropping but was working at the hall table directly outside, heard enough to understand that Marjorie had questions, real ones. The kind that weren't about the board or the contract, but about Cole himself, Whether he was all right, whether this marriage was something he'd chosen freely, or something he'd constructed out of desperation, whether Marjorie needed to be worried. Cole's voice, muffled through the door, was even and controlled as always. But Raina heard him say once with a roughness that wasn't quite contained. "She's not what I expected, Aunt Marjorie. None of this is what I expected." She moved away from the hall table after that. Some things weren't meant to be heard accidentally. The twist came on day 19. It came in the form of a phone call to Raina directly, not to Cole, not to Gerald, but to Raina's personal cell phone, which very few people at Black Ridge Ranch had. The number was from Millbrook. She didn't recognize it. She answered. The voice on the other end was a woman's, older, careful, with the particular hesitation of someone who had been talked into something and was now second-guessing it. Her name was Linda Pruitt. She was not related to Gerald. She ran the alterations counter at a department store in Millbrook and had known Raina's mother for 15 years. "I need to tell you something," Linda said. "And I need you to not be angry with me." Raina's chest went very still. "Okay. A man came to see me 3 weeks ago. He said he was doing research for a county property matter, and that anything I could tell him about you and your family would be helpful. He was nice about it. He didn't seem like he was trying to hurt anyone." "What did you tell him, Linda?" A long pause. "I told him that your family had financial difficulties, that your mother had been taking in more work than was good for her, that you had left town suddenly without much explanation." Another pause. "I didn't know it was going to be used against you. I swear I didn't know." Raina closed her eyes, pressed them shut for exactly 3 seconds, then opened them. "It's okay, Linda. It's not okay. He used what I said in a legal filing, Raina. I saw it on the county board's public notice. He made your family's situation sound like—" "I know what he made it sound like," Raina said. Her voice stayed even. It cost her. "Linda, I need you to do something for me. Will you do something for me? Anything. I need you to write down exactly what you told that man, word for word as best you can remember. And I need you to send it to an attorney named Gerald Pruitt. Can you do that?" A pause. "Is that going to help you?" "Yes," Raina said. "It's going to help me very much." She hung up and sat for a moment at the kitchen table in the quiet of a Wednesday afternoon, and she let herself feel it, the cold anger of being investigated, of her family's poverty, being used as a weapon of a stranger, paying polite visits to her mother's friends, and extracting ammunition dressed as conversation. Then, she picked up the phone and called Gerald. Then she called Cole. Cole picked up on the second ring. She told him concisely what Linda had said. There was silence on his end for 5 full seconds, longer than his usual processing pauses, which meant the anger was real and he was managing it. "He went to Millbrook," Cole said. It wasn't a question. 3 weeks ago, while we were preparing for the first hearing. Another silence. "Raina, don't apologize," she said. "I'm not calling for an apology. I'm calling because Linda is going to provide a written account to Gerald that documents exactly what Morrison's investigator asked and what he was told, which we can use to demonstrate that the affidavits were solicited, that they're not organic testimony, but recruited evidence." She paused. "That changes the character of his challenge legally." The silence this time was different. She knew that silence now had learned it over 6 weeks. It was the silence of Cole Blackridge being genuinely surprised by her. "Where are you?" he said. "Kitchen." "Stay there." He was home in 20 minutes. She heard his truck on the gravel before she heard the door, and she was still at the kitchen table when he came in, and he stopped in the doorway and looked at her with an expression she was learning to read, the one that had started appearing more frequently in the last week since the truck cab, and the kiss that had rearranged the furniture of everything. "You okay?" he said. "I'm fine." "Raina," she looked up at him. "I'm angry," she said honestly. "I'm angry that he went there, that he talked to people who know my mother, that he made our financial situation into evidence of something shameful." Her hands were flat on the table. "But I'm not undone. There's a difference. Cole crossed the kitchen and sat down across from her. Not the managed strategic distance he'd maintained for the first weeks. He sat down the way people sit down when they're not thinking about how it looks close, deliberate present. "I know there's a difference," he said. "I'm asking which one you are right now underneath the strategy." She looked at him. "Both," she said quietly. "I'm both." He nodded once, like that was the right answer, like he understood exactly what it meant to be functional and wounded at the same time, and to keep going anyway. "Okay," he said. "Then let's use it." Gerald received Linda's written account the next day and called it with understated attorney enthusiasm, potentially very useful. He filed a motion with the county board, arguing that Morrison's affidavit campaign constituted coordinated witness recruitment rather than organic community testimony, a distinction with legal teeth as it turned out. Morrison's lawyer responded within 48 hours, which told Raina that they'd landed somewhere that hurt. The board scheduled a second session. This time, Cole asked Raina to present part of the argument herself. She looked at him when he said it. They were in the study with Gerald going over the documentation, and Cole said it the way he said things that mattered directly without build-up watching her face. "You found the paragraph 19 language," Cole said. "You made the connection with Linda's testimony. Gerald thinks, and I agree, that the board will respond differently to hearing part of this from you directly, not as Cole Blackridge's wife performing a supporting role, as the person who actually did the analytical work." Gerald, to his credit, was nodding. "I'm not a lawyer," she said. "You don't have to be," Gerald said. "You're a fact witness who also happens to have done substantial document analysis. That's actually more compelling in this context." She looked at the legal pad in front of her. All those pages of annotations. All those hours at the kitchen table that had started as due diligence and had become something closer to genuine investment. "Okay," she said. Cole didn't say anything. But his hand moved across the table and rested briefly on her forearm, just a moment, just a touch, and then gone. It was the most unguarded he'd been outside of the truck cab, and it happened in front of Gerald, and Gerald very carefully looked at his papers and said nothing. The second board session was a different room somehow, even though it was the same carpet and the same institutional coffee. Different, because Raina sat at the table this time instead of in a chair against the wall. Different because Morrison across from her was reading something in her posture that he hadn't seen at the first session, not performance, not strategic presentation, but genuine earned authority. She presented the document analysis cleanly. She walked the board through the affidavit timeline versus the date of Morrison's investigator's Millbrook visit. She presented Linda's written account without drama, laying it next to the first submitted affidavit and letting the chronology speak. The board chair asked her twice to clarify technical points in the contract language. She clarified them. Morrison's lawyer objected twice. She waited each time for Gerald to respond, and when Gerald's responses were sufficient, she stayed quiet, and when she felt Gerald needed support, she added precisely the relevant paragraph and subsection number from memory. Cole sat beside her through all of it. He didn't speak unless directly addressed, but she could feel him, the steadiness of him, the particular quality of his attention when he was focused on something that mattered. He was watching the board. He was watching Morrison. He was, she realized, watching the room the same way she was reading it, with the same careful attention she'd developed over a lifetime of noticing what other people missed. They were doing the same thing, independently and together. That realization hit her somewhere below the strategic, somewhere in the place where important things settle when you're not looking. Morrison made his final play at the end of the session. He asked to address the board directly, a procedural allowance Gerald tried to object to, but lost. Morrison stood. He was composed. He was, Raina had to acknowledge, very good at this. "The board has heard compelling documentation today," he said, "and I want to acknowledge Mrs. Blackridge's thorough preparation. She is clearly an intelligent woman." He paused, and the pause was doing work. "But I want the board to consider something. The question before you is not whether Mrs. Blackridge is capable or thorough. It is whether this marriage existed as a genuine relationship prior to the contractual deadline. And no amount of document analysis changes the fundamental timeline. He looked at Raina, directly, deliberately, the way he'd looked at her in the hallway at the first hearing. Mrs. Blackridge, you walked into Blackridge Ranch as a dress delivery person on October 18th. You were married by November 2nd. 15 days. He let that sit. I am asking this board to consider whether 15 days is long enough to constitute the kind of marriage this contract requires. The room was very quiet. Raina felt Cole shift beside her, the smallest movement, but she felt it, and she knew what it meant. He was about to speak. He was going to defend the timeline, argue the legal definition, do what he always did, which was manage the problem with controlled precision. She put her hand on his arm. He stopped. She looked at Morrison. May I respond? The board chair nodded. Raina said, Mr. Morrison is right that we were married in 15 days. He's right that I walked into that ranch carrying someone else's dress. He's right that our beginning was unconventional. She paused. But I'd like to ask him and this board a question. How long does it take to know a person? Silence. My grandmother knew my grandfather for 2 weeks before she decided he was the person she was going to spend her life with, she said. My parents knew each other for 3 months. Time is one measure. It is not the only measure. She looked at the board chair. I have read every water rights document this ranch holds. I know Cole Blackridge's operational priorities, his fears for his family, legacy, his management philosophy, the way he talks to his staff versus the way he talks to lawyers, and the way he takes his coffee. I know him. She held the board chair's gaze. That is not something you can fake in 15 days. That is something you can only build by choosing every day to be present. Morrison looked at her. The composure was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. The board chair wrote something on her legal pad. Gerald allowed himself very briefly to look at the ceiling. The board deliberated for 4 days. 4 days was 4 days too long, and also, as Gerald pointed out, significantly shorter than the 30-day maximum the process allowed, which was itself information. Cole and Raina went home and did what they'd been doing: the ranch, the coffee, the kitchen table, the working rhythm that had stopped feeling like performance and started feeling like something she didn't have a word for yet, because the word she had for it was a word she wasn't ready to say. On the second night of waiting, Cole found her in the kitchen at 11 p.m. She couldn't sleep. He clearly couldn't either. He sat down across from her, and they sat in the quiet for a while, without speaking, which had stopped being unusual and had become its own kind of language. What do you do? He said finally. If this doesn't go our way. She looked at him. What do you mean? The ranch, the water rights, if Morrison wins the challenge. He was looking at the table. What do you do? What do we do? She corrected quietly. He looked up. I'm still here, Cole. Whatever the board decides, I'm still here for the year. We have a contract. She paused. But that's not actually what you're asking. He held her gaze. No, he said. It's not. She understood the real question. He was asking what she would choose, not what she was obligated to, not what the contract required, but what she would choose if the external pressure disappeared. And all that was left was the two of them in a kitchen at 11 p.m., and a question that hadn't been asked yet. She picked up her coffee cup, looked at it. Ask me again, she said quietly, when the board announces. It was not a no. They both knew it was not a no. Cole nodded once, like that was enough, like he could wait. She had learned over 7 weeks that Cole Blackridge was very good at waiting for things that mattered. On the 4th day, Gerald called at 8:17 in the morning. Raina was at the table. Cole was standing at the counter. She watched his face as he listened, and she read every word of the call in the geography of his jaw and his eyes, and the particular stillness that came over him when something significant was happening. He hung up. He turned and looked at her. The board ruled in our favor, he said. The challenge is dismissed. The water rights contract stands. She sat with it for a moment. Let it land. Let the weight of 7 weeks of sustained pressure find somewhere to settle. Then she said, "Good." Cole crossed the kitchen in 4 strides and sat down across from her. And this time he reached across the table and took both her hands in both of his, and he held them on the surface of the table in the ordinary morning light. And he didn't say anything for a long time. He just held on. Like something he'd been holding by himself for too long had finally found another set of hands. She didn't pull away. She held back. Outside, Pete was calling across the yard to someone about the east fence. Dolores was moving in the next room. The ranch was going about its morning with its ordinary working noise. And at the kitchen table, Cole Blackridge held Raina Hale's hands and didn't let go, and she understood that something had ended. And something else, something neither of them had planned for, negotiated, or arranged, had quietly, irrevocably begun. He held her hands for a long time that morning, long enough that the coffee went cold, long enough that Dolores came to the kitchen doorway, saw them, and turned quietly around without saying a word, which from Dolores was the loudest possible statement. Long enough that Raina stopped counting the seconds and just stayed, which was something she hadn't let herself do easily in 23 years of a life that had always required her to be moving toward the next thing, the next problem, the next obligation. When Cole finally let go, he did it slowly, like releasing something he'd decided to put down carefully rather than drop. "I need to call Pete," he said. His voice was different, not softer exactly, but less armored. Like a layer had come off in the kitchen light and he hadn't put it back yet. "I know," she said. "And Gerald needs a formal response drafted for the county record." "I'll start on it," she said. He stood, looked at her for a moment from his full height, with those hazel eyes that had given away so little for so long, and were now, she thought, giving away considerably more than he probably realized. "Raina." "Yeah." "I asked you last night what you would choose," he said. "When the board announced." She met his gaze. "You did." "The board announced." Her heart did the thing it had been doing more frequently, and she had been telling it less frequently to stop. "I know it did. So." He stood there. A man who ran thousands of acres, who had managed a legal battle and a family legacy and a manufactured marriage with unbroken composure, standing in his own kitchen, looking at her like he wasn't entirely sure what came next, and was for once not pretending otherwise. She said, "Ask me tonight. Over a real dinner. Not a board hearing, and not a contract, and not a strategy session." She held his gaze. "Ask me when it's just us." He was quiet for a beat. Then, "Okay." He walked out. She heard his boots on the porch. The screen door, the familiar sound of his morning moving into the yard. She picked up her cold coffee and drank it anyway, and told herself the warmth she felt had nothing to do with the way he'd said, "Okay," like it was a promise. She told herself that for approximately 45 seconds before she stopped bothering. The day moved the way days move, when something large has just shifted and the world hasn't caught up yet, ordinarily, almost stubbornly normal. Pete wanted to discuss the East Fence repair timeline. Gerald needed 3 signatures on the board response documents. A supplier called about a delayed feed delivery, and Raina, who had by this point absorbed enough of the ranch's operational logic to handle a supplier call without panicking, managed the conversation herself and reported back to Cole in 4 sentences. He listened, nodded, said, "Good call on the delivery window. I pushed back 2 days because the eastern pasture rotation doesn't need the supplemental feed until the 15th, she said. "I know," he said. "That's why it was a good call." She went back to the kitchen table. He went back to the yard. This was their rhythm. Now the working partnership that had grown up around the contractual one, like a vine around a fence post, so thoroughly intertwined that she couldn't remember anymore where the obligation ended and the genuine began. She wasn't sure the distinction still mattered. Garrett appeared at noon uninvited, as was his custom, and sat down at the kitchen table with the particular energy of someone who knew something and was deciding how to deliver it. "The board ruling is all over the county," he said. Raina looked up from her legal pad. "Already?" Morrison's challenge was public record. People have been watching. Garrett reached across and stole a piece of bread from the plate Dolores had left. You know what people are saying? I can guess. They're saying Cole's wife went in there and took Morrison apart with a water rights contract and a witness statement. Garrett grinned the easy, unguarded Garrett grin that she'd become genuinely fond of. They're saying Blackridge Ranch's new woman is not to be underestimated. Something warm moved through her. She kept her face neutral. People are being generous. People are being accurate, Garrett said. He looked at her with the directness he always brought. How are things really? She considered the question. Complicated. With Cole. With all of it. Garrett tore a piece of his stolen bread, chewed. Can I tell you something about my brother that he would hate me for telling you? Probably. He called me the night of the board hearing, after you two got home. Garrett looked at her steadily. He didn't say much. You know how he is. But he said, a pause. And for a moment, Garrett looked less like the easy, smiling younger brother and more like someone carrying something careful. He said, she said I was scared, Garrett. In front of the board, in front of Morrison, in front of everyone. And it saved us. And then he was quiet for a while. And then he said, I don't know what to do with that. Raina was very still. He doesn't know what to do with someone who sees him clearly and stays, Garrett said quietly. He never has. Our dad he was a good man, but he wasn't a man who talked about fear. Cole learned early that the way you lead is by not letting the fear show. Ever. He looked at her. You showed the board his fear, and it helped him. That broke something open in him that I don't think has been open in a very long time. She looked at the table. At the legal pad with its careful annotations. At the coffee cup with the ring stain from this morning when he'd held her hands and not let go. He should tell me that himself, she said. I know, Garrett said. I'm telling you so you're not waiting to see if he will, because he will. Cole does everything slowly, and then all at once. He stood, took the rest of the bread. Just wanted you to be ready. He left. Dolores appeared from nowhere, replaced the bread plate without comment, and disappeared again. Raina sat in the kitchen and felt 7 weeks of accumulated weight redistribute itself into something lighter and more frightening and more real than anything the water rights contract had ever threatened. The dinner was Dolores's doing, though nobody acknowledged it directly. Raina came downstairs at 6:30 to find the kitchen table set for two with actual candles. Not romantic staging exactly, more the quiet deliberateness of a woman who had worked for the Blackridge family for 22 years and had opinions about how certain evenings should be handled. Dolores herself was gone. Her coat was off the hook. The food was warm on the stove. Cole was standing in the kitchen when Raina came in looking at the table with an expression that was caught somewhere between gratitude and mild embarrassment. Dolores, he said by way of explanation. I gathered, Raina said. They sat down, served themselves. And for a few minutes they ate in the particular silence that had become over 7 weeks, one of the most comfortable silences Raina had ever known, the kind that doesn't demand filling, that has enough trust in it to simply breathe. Then Cole set down his fork, looked at her. When I saw you walk in that night, he said, with the dress box and the borrowed purse and the shoes that were clearly hurting your feet. She looked up. You could tell they were hurting. You walked like someone solving a problem, he said. Not limping, just managing. You had this look on your face like whatever was happening you were going to deal with it. Something in his voice was quieter than usual. I didn't choose you because you were convenient. I want you to know that. I chose you in 3 seconds because of that look. She set down her own fork. The 50,000, he continued. The arrangement. I knew it would solve the legal problem, but I also knew in those 3 seconds that whoever that woman was who walked in holding someone else's dress like it was her own responsibility, she was not going to fall apart. And I needed someone who was not going to fall apart. Cole, I'm not finished. He held her gaze. I needed someone who wouldn't fall apart. What I didn't expect was someone who would make the whole thing better. Who would read a 400-page contract and find what Gerald missed? Who would stand in a hallway and tell Morrison that she wasn't going to let him confuse her background with her ceiling? His jaw moved. Who would tell a room full of strangers that I was scared and make it the thing that saved us? She was very still across the table. The arrangement ends in 5 months, he said. The year runs out in April. You would leave with the settlement, the shop, everything we agreed to. And it would be fair. It would be exactly what we contracted for. He looked at her steadily. But I don't want fair anymore. I want you to stay. Not because of the ranch. Not because of the water rights or Morrison or any of it. He paused. 1 beat. 2. I want you to stay because this kitchen makes sense with you in it. Because I sleep better knowing you're across the hall. Because the last 7 weeks are the most real 7 weeks I've had since my father died, and maybe before that. The candles Dolores had lit were small and steady between them. Raina said, "You held my hands this morning for 20 minutes. I know." "You didn't say any of this morning." "I know," he said. "I needed until tonight. I told you I'd do everything slowly and then, all at once," she said softly. He stopped. "Garrett told you that." "Garrett told me that." Something crossed Cole's face. The almost smile she had learned to love, the one that lived at the corner of his mouth and only came out when he was genuinely caught off guard. "I'm going to have a conversation with my brother." "Don't," she said. "He was right." Cole looked at her. She reached across the table. Not calculated, not rehearsed. She reached across and put her hand over his, the way she had in that first practice session 7 weeks ago, when it had felt deliberate and chosen and rehearsed, and it had still traveled up her arm, like something that couldn't be trained. "I didn't walk into this for love," she said. "I walked in for my family, and that was true, and I'd do it again." She held his gaze. "But somewhere between paragraph 19 and the kitchen table, and the truck cab, and this morning somewhere in all of it, I stopped doing this for the contract and started doing it because it's where I want to be." She paused. "Let it be real." "You're where I want to be, Cole." He turned his hand over under hers. Held it. "Stay," he said. "I'm staying," she said. The twist that followed was not dramatic. That was the thing about it. It arrived quietly, the way the most significant things often do, dressed in ordinary clothes. It was Raina's mother who delivered it. Clara Hale called on a Sunday morning 3 days after the dinner, and her voice had the particular texture of someone who had been turning something over for a long time and had finally decided to say it. "I need to tell you something," Clara said, "about why I cried when you told us about the arrangement." Raina was in the hallway. Cole was outside. "You cried because it was a lot to take in, Mama." "I cried," Clara said, "because I recognized it." A pause. Raina's hand tightened on the phone. "Your grandfather, my father, he and your grandmother had an arrangement," Clara said quietly. "Did I ever tell you that they married because her family needed the money and his family needed a connection to her father's land? Everyone in town knew it was practical." A pause. "They were married 51 years. Your grandmother said at his funeral that marrying him for practical reasons was the most romantic thing she'd ever done. Because she chose him with her eyes open, and then she chose him again every day after." Raina stood in the hallway of Black Ridge Ranch and felt something move through her that had no clean name. Grief and recognition, and something that felt like the closing of a very long circle. "Mama," she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. "I'm not telling you what to do," Clara said. "I'm telling you that choosing someone for real reasons, good reasons, reasons that have to do with survival and family and responsibility, that's not less than love. Sometimes it's the foundation love is built on." A pause. "Is he good to you?" Raina thought about hands held across a kitchen table. About coffee poured without being asked. About a man who said fair when she pushed back and okay, like it was a promise, and held her hands for 20 minutes in the ordinary morning light after the hardest 7 weeks of both their lives. "Yes," she said. "He's good to me. Then you call me when you're ready." Clara said, "and I'll come see this ranch you've been telling me about, and I'll bring my good dress." A pause, and then, with the particular warmth of a woman who had spent 30 years sewing other people's happiness into fabric and was finally watching some of it find her own daughter, the one without the split seam. Raina laughed. It came out wet and real and entirely unmanaged. She told Cole about her grandparents that evening. He listened the way he listened to everything that mattered completely, without interruption, with his full attention on her face. When she finished, he said, 51 years. 51 years, she confirmed. He was quiet for a moment. What did your grandfather do before the arrangement? He was a farmer, practical man, didn't talk much about feelings. Cole looked at her. And after, she smiled. He still didn't talk much, but my grandmother said he showed up for everything. Every school play, every hard season, every ordinary Tuesday. She paused. She said he showed up so consistently that eventually the showing up became the feeling. Cole was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I can do that." "I know you can," she said. "I'm not—" He stopped. Started again. "I'm not a man who finds it easy to say things. Cole," she said gently. "You held my hands for 20 minutes this morning and drove 40 minutes in silence the night we met and poured my coffee before I asked for it and stood next to me in a county board hearing like I was the most important thing in that room." She looked at him steadily. "You say things all the time. You just don't always use words." The almost smile came, fuller this time, more real. "Your grandmother was right," he said, "about the showing up. She was right about a lot of things." He reached across, tucked a strand of her hair back behind her ear with the same quiet deliberateness he brought to everything. Careful, certain, no hesitation. She felt it everywhere. "Then I'll keep showing up," he said, "for every ordinary Tuesday." Morrison sent a letter in January. Not a legal filing, not an affidavit. A letter handwritten addressed to Cole at the ranch. Raina was at the table when Cole opened it and read it, and she watched his face move through 3 distinct expressions in 30 seconds: surprise, caution, and then something she identified after a moment as complicated respect. He handed it to her. She read it. Morrison wrote that he had made inquiries into Raina Hale independently of his legal challenge. Personal inquiries, he called them, and that what he had found had caused him to reconsider his characterization of the marriage as expedient. He wrote that a woman who annotated a 400-page water rights document on her own initiative, who tracked down a witness and recognized the legal significance of recruited testimony, and who stood in a county board hearing and defended a man's character with the specificity of someone who genuinely knew him. That woman was not a prop or a convenience. He wrote that he still intended to pursue the water rights contract through legitimate competitive channels when the current agreement came up for renewal in 3 years. He wrote that he looked forward to negotiating with both of them. Raina set the letter down. "He's warning us." "He's warning us," Cole agreed, "and respecting us enough to do it directly." "That's almost a compliment." "From Harrison Morrison," Cole said. "That's practically a standing ovation." She looked at the letter, then at Cole. "We have 3 years." "We have 3 years," he said. "Then we'd better learn the renewal contract language." Cole looked at her with the full version of the smile this time, not the almost smile, not the carefully managed corner of the mouth, but the real thing, the one she had now seen only 4 times and intended to spend considerable effort earning more of. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she agreed. Spring came to Black Ridge Ranch the way it always had, slowly then all at once. April arrived, and the year on their contract was complete. Gerald noted it in a brief email with characteristic attorney understatement. "The agreed term has concluded. Please advise on next steps." Cole showed her the email over breakfast. She read it, set the phone down, picked up her coffee. "What do you want to tell him?" Cole asked. She looked across the table at this man she had married for practical reasons and had chosen every day since with eyes wide open. This man who showed up for ordinary Tuesdays and held her hands without being asked, and said fair when she pushed back, and had learned slowly, and then all at once, to stop carrying everything alone. "Tell him," she said, "that there are no next steps." Cole looked at her. "Tell him the arrangement concluded as planned," she said, "and the marriage continues as intended." She held Cole's gaze across the kitchen table in the ordinary spring morning light, with Pete calling across the yard, and Dolores moving in the next room, and the whole working, breathing life of Black Ridge Ranch going on around them, exactly as it had for 7 months. "Tell him we're staying." Cole reached across the table, took her hand, held it. "Yeah," he said. "We are." Clara Hale came to the ranch in May, wearing her good dress, the one without the split seam. She walked through the kitchen and shook Dolores's hand and asked Pete 3 detailed questions about cattle operations that made Pete look at Cole with visible approval. She sat at the kitchen table where Raina had spent 7 months learning a life she hadn't planned for, and she drank Dolores's coffee, and she looked around at all of it with the quiet eyes of a woman who had spent 30 years sewing other people's lives together and knew what something well-constructed looked like. At the end of the day, when Cole had gone out to check the evening pasture, Clara took Raina's hands across the table, the way Cole had taken them in the morning after the board ruling, holding them in both of hers, steady and certain. "Your grandmother would have liked him," Clara said. Raina felt it in her throat. "Yeah. Practical man, doesn't talk much about feelings." Clara's eyes were warm and a little wet. "Shows up for everything." Raina squeezed her mother's hands and did not cry mostly. Outside, she could hear Cole's boots on the porch steps, the familiar sound, the sound she had been hearing for 7 months and had stopped noticing as remarkable and had started noticing as home. The screen door opened. He came in. He looked at the two of them, at the table, hands clasped, and something in his face did the thing. It did the quiet, unguarded thing that only happened when he forgot to manage his expression because something mattered too much. "Mrs. Hale," he said to Clara, "I hope Dolores didn't let you go without eating." "She absolutely did not," Clara said warmly. He looked at Raina over her mother's head. She looked back, and in that look was all of it. The wrong door and the right door and the dress box and 4 words and 7 months of coffee and contract language and kitchen table silences and a kiss in a truck cab that had opened something neither of them had been planning to open. All of it, contained in one ordinary look in one ordinary kitchen on one ordinary Tuesday in May. That was how it ended and how it began, not with a grand declaration or a dramatic gesture, but with a man coming home and a woman already there, and both of them choosing quietly and completely, and without a single contract between them to stay. Some wrong turns, it turns out, are the most right things that will ever happen to you. You just have to be brave enough to stop looking for the exit. And Raina Hale, who had walked into the wrong room on a cold October night, carrying someone else's dress, and had walked out, eventually carrying something entirely her own, was never looking for the exit again.